Greetings, friends. My name is Pavel Stelmach, and I'm glad to present for you the new episode of our daily wrap-up series. The 8th meeting in the Rammstein format ended today in Germany. As usual, we will see and learn about all the decisions made in a few weeks. After all, the agreements concern the defense of different countries, and of course until no one reveals all the cards. But we can already say that the adopted decisions are very important for Ukrainian defense.
I think you may have heard the German Minister of Defense say earlier that they've not made a decision on the provision of Leopard tanks. What we're really focused on is making sure that Ukraine has the capability that it needs to be successful right now. So we have a window of opportunity here, between now and the spring whenever they commence their operation, their counteroffensive. And that's not a long time. And we have to pull together the right capabilities. And you heard the chairman walk through some of the substantial combat power that we and some of our allies have offered to provide. There are tanks in those offerings. Poland, for example, continues to offer tanks and will provide tanks, and other countries will offer some tank capability as well. I don't have any announcements to make on M1s, and you heard the German Minister of Defense say that they've not made a decision on Leopards. So.
Let me remind you that during the week before Rammstein, one country in front of the other talked about helping Ukraine. In particular, Britain announced the largest deliveries since the beginning of full-scale aggression. Estonia and Finland also announced large deliveries. 9 European countries signed the Tallinn agreements on further support for Ukraine. Another package was also announced in the USA.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is a crucial moment. Russia is regrouping, recruiting and trying to re-equip. This is not a moment to slow down. It's a time to dig deeper. The Ukrainian people are watching us. The Kremlin is watching us. And history is watching us. So we won't let up. And we won't waver in our determination to help Ukraine defend itself from Russia's imperial aggression. Lloyd Austin, United States Secretary of Defense.
I would like to point out that currently the biggest Ukrainian expectations is the supply of Leopard 2 tanks. We are waiting for Germany's decision regarding the possibility of their supply. Modern heavy equipment will accelerate the victory of Ukraine, and after that, we Ukrainians, and with that the whole world, will be able to return to ordinary everyday affairs. As long as Russian aggression continues, we are all in danger.
This war poses a particularly acute danger for the Euro-Atlantic community, considering Russia's overt goals to destroy the European security order and undermine viability of democracy as a form of social life. With its heroic resistance and successful operations to liberate its territories, Ukraine decisively provided its ability to stop the aggressor state. Thanks to the courage and resilience of Ukrainian people, the heroism and professionalism of the Ukrainian armed force, there is a growing realization around the world that the strongest Ukraine's defense capabilities become, the sooner Russia will come to accepting futility of its attempt to conquer our country, and the sooner this cruel war of the heart of Europe will be over. Joint statement by the Minister for Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, Dmytro Kuleba, and the Minister for Defense of Ukraine, Alexei Reznikov.
To date, a lot has been done to strengthen the defense potential of Ukraine. Our country is grateful to more than 50 partner states for their practical military assistance. However, Russia retains a substantial quantitative advantage in troops, weapons and military equipment. Russian troops continue their offensive in eastern regions of Ukraine. The Kremlin is determined to further escalate hostilities. Prospects of Russia's attempt to take revenge for its failures in its war against Ukraine, including the threat of a new full-scale offensive by the Russian forces, are very real. For the second day, air alarms are sounding all over Ukraine. And no, we are not afraid of them, we are angry with them, especially because they are flying over Russian fighter jets in the Belarusian sky. Since January the 16th, the so-called Allied aviation exercises have been taking place in Belarus, during which Russian MiG-31 Dagger missile carriers take off from Belarusian airports. And they don't just take off, but with a rocket on board. Of course, we are expecting a new strike as was the case in March against the Retroville shopping center. The Russian-Belarusian military exercises are a factor of threat to regional security because under their cover there is a concentration of potential for the expansion of aggression. The use of strategic aviation and drones for strikes on Ukraine. Lukashenko's regime is complicit in Russian aggression, but so far passive. The extent of his responsibility will depend on the following actions. Ukraine has never had aggressive intentions towards Belarus and has never provoked it. If one day Lukashenko declares that he had no other choice, it will be the same lie that Putin is forced to resort to now. The Command of Defense Forces of Ukraine is closely monitoring the situation in Belarus in order to forecast the assess the risks of a new invasion from its territory.
Я понимаю, что наша Беларусь оккупирована.
I understand that our Belarus is occupied, that it is not that separate country, like it exists. It is part of Russia anyway. Who's the president there? The president is not Lukashenko. The president is Putin. And the Belarusians themselves, if this duet of Lukashenko and Putin did not have power over them, they would never have fought. They would never have allowed such a number of planes, equipment and armies to be in Belarus for Russian soldiers to be treated here. But that is, it is necessary to recognize full participation in the war.
And the Nobel laureate's words make sense, because Belarus was known for its partisan movement during the Second World War. Active Belarusians disrupt Russian plans even now. They share photos and videos of the movement of Russian equipment, arrange sabotage near military units and on the railway. Therefore, let's hope that in the end, the Belarusians will find the strength to end Lukashenko's presidential hegemony and start building a more democratic country.
В Беларуси изменения могут произойти гораздо раньше, чем в России.
In Belarus, changes can occur much earlier than in Russia. We must also understand this, because we are not Russians. We have been against Lukashenko since 2020. And in Russia, I feel that most of the population still supports Putin and supports the war. So changes in Belarus may begin earlier, and they may affect events in Ukraine, as well as events in Russia. Remember, in 2020, when there were protests in Belarus, it caused protests in Russia.
However, for now, as much as we would not like it, Belarus is a full-fledged participant in Russian aggression. After all, it was from the territory of our northern neighbor that the tank troops marched on Kiev. It was from Belarusian territory that the Chernobyl NPP was captured, from where airstrikes are carried out on Ukraine. And since the fall, our intelligence has been studying information about a possible repeat attack from Belarus.
Украина уже живет в режиме полномасштабного военного вторжения.
Ukraine is already living in the regime of a full-scale military invasion. Mobilization measures are continuing in Russia. A new personal reserve is being assembled, a huge amount of manpower. And of course, this Slavian force will continue to be thrown like cannon fodder to the Ukrainian front. In what directions, in what volumes, this is a separate conversation. And of course, both Ukrainian intelligence and the general staff have this information. And our partners and allies also own this information. The exchange of information is intense. If Putin decides to take this crazy step, this is simply illogical. It kills the Russians themselves, destroys their economic, their development prospects. If he takes any other crazy steps, Ukraine knows how to defend itself and how to stop him, and knows the free world.
But while Ukrainian, British and American intelligence assure that an attack from Belarus is not being prepared, although it is possible, now, as we understand, Putin is again trying to convince Lukashenko to provide his troops for the attack. It is not for nothing that Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov flew to Minsk the day before, where he met Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko and the new head of Belarusian Foreign Ministry, Sergei Aleynik. And I will not be surprised if it turns out that the death of Aleynik's predecessor, Volodymyr Mackay, was a black mark for Lukashenko. Russians are good at poisoning people. Think of Skripal or Litvinenko. Recently, former Deputy Energy Minister of Russia in 2002, Vladimir Milov, made a large article in Center for Liberal Modernity about the future of Russia, and for me, his reflections are wrong. Milov is one of the prominent opposition politicians in Russia. In 2016, he joined Alexei Navalny's team, and all his statements are based on the thesis that Russia will be democratic after Putin's departure from power. Milov explains why the extreme scenarios like the radicalization of post-Putin regime, Putin's successor maintaining a similar hardline regime, identically, and a breakup of Russia do not seem possible. He said that another attempt for democratic change appears to be the most likely scenario of Russia's evolution. But for me, democratic rebirth of Russia is impossible, because if the federation became democratic, then the war must be stopped, and Russia will pay reparations. But are the Russian people ready for that? Are new politicians ready to admit the mistakes of the modern regime and give all guilty Russian authorities for punishment? And if they are, how will Russians perceive this? Because as for me, the agreement that will end the Russian-Ukrainian war will create a new wave of grievance among the people, and it will be the same as in Germany between the First and Second World War.
Putin's put the time bomb under his regime, and it is not so slow anymore. He is arming his own opposition. The opposition is not only the one that is on the streets and that fights and sits in the prison. She's actually right here. This is Prigozhin. These are other field commanders in arms with a mass of disgruntled people who will be dissatisfied with lost battles, who will be dissatisfied with inadequate support, payment, heavy losses, etc.
Also, Milov said that the most relevant examples of comparison with future Russia are post-Ceausescu Romania or post-Chun South Korea. Iran and North Korea, which are frequently mentioned, are probably not too relevant examples for these reasons, and one of them is that Iran and North Korea are extremely repressive regimes, to a degree unknown in Russia since the Stalin era. And Russia is not like that. Where people can be imprisoned for protesting with a white paper, where has the European Charter of Human Rights planned to be denounced? And another, Iran and North Korea were always relatively poor countries. But what about Russia? Especially if you take away their natural resources or just take a look for ordinary people outside large cities. They are worse than poor, and the reason for all these problems is Putin. He created this strong political system that allowed him to stay in power, but at the same time almost completely destroyed the country.
Yeltsin was a large-scale man, and he was not afraid of rivals. And under him, Russia gave birth the political leaders for every taste. Remember, Zhirinovsky, Yavlinsky, Zhuganov, Leopard, Putin are another. Therefore, any person who is taller than his knee, taller than the tops of his boots, he simply removes. And is this since he can rule until Russia collapses or turn into a third-rate structure.
In Milov's opinion, another attempt for democratic change following some years of transitionary post-Putin authoritarian uncertainty appears to be the most likely scenario of Russia's evolution. But it is essential that the democratic West learns from past failures and supports Russia's next attempt for democratic change instead of snubbing it. But are you sure, Mr. Milov, that the Russian people are ready for changes of their thinking? Do you believe in such a high level of self-awareness and intelligence to admit their mistakes and apologize to your neighbors? Did Russia have the right to attack Moldova, Georgia, Ukraine, and support separatist pseudo-countries in these countries? And do you really hope for the democratization of people who have been convinced for almost 20 years that they should not believe in politics? People who have been taught for 20 years that you should not think about anything and only accept what the media says. Aggressive people who, after the tragedy of World War II, have the slogan, "We can do it again," instead of "never again." And what about Ukraine in your conclusion, Mr. Milov? How will you explain the future relations between two countries? Or Ukraine, as a younger sister, should understand your country's mistakes and accept your apology, if it will, and then join the democratic big union with Russians and Belarusians? But there is the biggest problem. We don't want to be in one country with you. We cannot forgive all the terror committed not only by your government, but also by your people. Putin sent the draft law on termination of effect of international agreements of the Council of Europe in relation to Russia, as the country had been expelled from the Council in March last year. The Council of Europe is a pan-European international organization that sets standards of civility and protection of human rights. Before 2022, only Belarus, with its dictatorship headed by Lukashenko, was not part of the Council of Europe. But in the end, Putin's Russia deserved to be exiled as well. Among the documents suspended in Russia are basic acts, like the Convention on the Protection of Human Rights, the Fundamental Freedoms, the European Convention on Suppression of Terrorism, the European Charter of Local Self-Government, the European Social Charter, etc. But the violation of human rights we can see right now in Russia.
У нас очень выборочно применяется законодательство, то есть власти могут говорить
We have a very selective application of legislation. The authorities can speak and they will get away with everything. Moreover, if one of the oppositionists or people who simply do not support the war say the same thing, they are punished. We have seen this since the beginning of the war. The legislation is applied absolutely randomly. There is no logic in this. That is, if someone did not like that you put a heart under an anti-war post, you can be detained for this, even if this post does not contain the word war. We saw in cases was started for the word special operation in quotation marks, saying that quotation marks also discredit the Russian army.
Putin's decision to abandon his obligations under these conventions proved that Moscow used to sign them for reputational reasons rather than due to shared values. Therefore, Russia has no place in the Council of Europe. So the tyrant-run terrorist state decided to show off its true barbaric nature to the world. Reunification of international obligations does not all mean cancellation of responsibility for violations of the basic principles of international law, in particular in temporarily occupied territories. But Russia is not only legally withdrawing from the world. Because of its aggression, Russia has also lost its economic levels of influence on the world. Today, the world does not need Russian resources. Gas in Europe was replaced by LNG. Now only China buys fuel, but the volumes needed for the underworld and the underworld are radically different. Oil and its products are also not bought from Russia, firstly because of sanctions, and secondly, Russia does not receive profits due to the low cost of oil. Russia also failed to pressure the world through hunger. The Ukrainian grain initiative is currently saving the countries of Africa and the Middle East with our grain. Therefore, Ukrainian influence on the world is growing every day, and Russian influence is only decreasing. And surprisingly, such trends arose precisely because of Russia's behavior. That concludes our today's video. Thank you for watching and stay tuned for future videos. Subscribe to our channel and goodbye.